Hello, welcome to part 2. This is the texturing part. As I say, it's going to be a little bit longer than part 1 because we're going to get quite detailed with this. But we're going to add a little bit more displacement to add to what we already have created. But this is going to take longer if I keep talking, so let's just get involved, shall we? Oh, so this is where we left off. I just duplicated a few, but we don't need it. So grab yourself a shader editor, and the first thing I would like to do is add a little bit more displacement. So to do this, I'm going to make a new material to start with, and while we're there, go into your settings, your material settings, and then bump and displacement, or displacement and bump. And we're going to need a Shift A vector displacement, Shift A texture. I think we'll do a noise texture, and Shift A texture, input and geometry. There we go. And we're going to take the position from as the input, and we're going to add a color ramp. Oh, blast. Q, Shift A converter color ramp. Let's put that in, and let's have a butcher's. So that's what it looks like. Now the thing about the displacement is we already have some displacement on this, and white, anything that's white is going to push the geometry further out, anything that's black is going to suck it in. I don't want the geometry to really be pushed out any further than it already is. I need a bit of variation. So I'm going to bring this right down to 0.15, and I'm going to close this gap, and not close the gap, just make I want these kind of chunks, these black chunks, give it a bunch of detail. And but as I say, if we plug this straight into displacement, you'll see what happens. So put that into height, and then plug your displacement into your displacement, and just change this material to a grey for now. So that's what it's done. Where it's white, it's pushing it out. Where it's black, it's not. So if I now lower this, you see, because I don't want it to do it that much, like a little bit, add a little bit of displacement, but not too much, and I can control that with the shade of grey. So I'm going to add a little bit to that. Yeah, that looks cute. And as an added effect, we are going to use a texture, wave texture. Just drop. Also use the position. We're going to use position because that's part of the procedural nature. When we move it, it will move. Let's get a color ramp, drop that in that, but let's reset it. Let's have a look at that. And I would like bands to go up and down like that. I'm going to bring this because I only really want one large line like that. Crank up the detail, crank up the distortion, and then we want to make that very, very contrasty. Maybe in a bit more scale, a bit more distortion. Oh, hello. Yeah, that'll do. So that's going to create a crack right through the middle. And again, I don't want it to push the geometry out, so we're going to screen this. It's going to ignore the white and just tell it to look at this black. So if we move that, Shift A, color, mix color, and then drop that on the one that's going into displacement. Change this to screen, multiply. We're going to multiply that, so it's only going to look at the black, not the white. And crank that up, drop that in, and then if we look at this, we now have a crack, a displaced crack. And because we've used position, if we move it, the crack is still there. So that's pretty sweet too. All right, that's pretty much the displacement sorted out. But we're not done with the displacement information because we're going to add that to some color information. But first, let's put something on this boulder. Let's initially take the roughness right up and the specular right down. And let's start with a Musgrave, one of my favorite textures. And for this, we are just going to leave it with generated, which it comes as standard. And let's add a color ramp. You could just copy one, but I'm out. Color ramp, drop that in, and then let's have a look. And this is also going to be our bump information as well as using this for color information. So detail 15, dimension 0.1, and then yeah, that looks cool. So because we're going to use this as bump information, we want to add another color ramp and reset that. The reason being, if we look at this, if we change the colors on this, I want the gray and a bit less gray, no, a bit more gray. Now that is affected by this as well. If I was to just take this straight out of here, then when I move this slider, the bump isn't going to follow, because we're going to go take this and use this as bump as well. So that's why I've done that. So if you plug that in there into base color, Control Shift click, we now get a kind of racky feel to it. And like I said, if you add a bump, vector bump, drop that into there, and then drop the normal into the normal. Oh, actually get it in though. And if we just zoom in, we can see it a bit clearer. Now normally I figure out which way by moving it slightly, and I can see that's sticking out. I want these to be kind of chips, so I'm going to invert that. That's better. Might even have a bit more I'd like a bit more of that. Yeah, that'll do it. What happens if we put the strength up to 5? I kind of like that. Okay, so that's part 1. Now we can add, using the ambient occlusion, input ambient occlusion, we can use this to add a kind of mossy effect as opposed to ambient occlusion. So occlusion, not inclusion. We're not including the ambience. I just duplicated, reset color ramp, drop the color in, and Control Shift click. Let's have a look. So if we bring the black up, these are the areas that are going to be our kind of greeny mossy color, and just change this color to a kind of green. That'll do it. And we're just going to multiply this. Again, screen will ignore the white over that. So Shift A, color, mix color, drop that in there, put that one in bottom one, change that to multiply. And did I say screen again? I meant multiply. The white will be ignored. Okay, so there we are. So now we've got a bit of texture, I mean a bit of color into that thing. Now for the displacement, we're also going to use that information to add even more color. So just move those over. So this is, if we Control Shift click, this is the displacement, and I want a different color for the black to what the color is for the gray. So I shall duplicate a color ramp and just take that information and reset it. And I'm going to want to multiply again, so I'm going to give this a browny color and leave that at white. And if we Control Shift click now, we've got brown and grey instead of black and grey. And same thing with this, just duplicate that, drop it on there, because we're multiplying that over this, or the other way around, doesn't really matter, I don't think. Color multiply, posh, and that's already going in. So if we Control Shift click that, now we have a different color. Might even lighten that a bit. Yeah. So where the displacement is will affect where this color is. If we put a color ramp, just duplicate this one, drop it on there, and then reset. If we drop a color ramp on here and we start changing the displacement, the color will follow it. So the more displacement, the less of that brown color. If we had no displacement, it's a lot brown. But that's how we get a bit more variation in that old thing. And I think we're not far off from just mucking around. I'm just checking my sun because I don't want it to be that harsh. Put that to 25. And I'm also going to edit my world and just have a bit more brightness. Okay, maybe even more brightness. All the way up some. So that is pretty much, I think, in a nutshell, the boulder. And what you can do with all this, because obviously it's not a mess, but it's, you know, there's a lot to be going on there. So what I would want to do is group it all, and here's one I made earlier. So this, I put it into a group. Don't mind the colours are different, it's exactly the same effect. But I've just grouped it, put it all into a group, connected it up. And if you don't know how to group it, then I'll put a link in the description for my grouping tutorial, which will teach you exactly how to do this. And then from here we can have different random shapes, different scales. All the controls are now here. I've called it the crack, but yeah, you can edit all here. One thing with groups though is the color. You'd need to go inside it, and if you want to edit the masks with the color ramps, you need to go inside the group. But that's pretty much the majority of the work done for building it. And let me just think of a couple of tips. Yeah, so let's say we're happy with the material. If I just shift D that, and then at the moment there's been no changes to the cube shape, but if I'll press O for proportional, and I'm just going to start moving the geometry about a bit, make it look less like a cube. And as you can see, the geometry is, the displacement, everything is following that geometry. And because all of this is, well, 2/3 of this is with the displaced modifiers, don't forget, you don't need to just edit them inside the material. You've also got all of this control outside of the material as well. So you can muck around with this, go into the texture properties panel, and I don't know, lower the scale, whatever. There's so much you can do to do this, to change these things. As I say, even it's the same thing, Alt D, I can clone that. So now it's only using the same memory, but it's a different shape because it's sitting somewhere else different in the scene. Okay, that's it, done, wicked, sick. Muck around with it, play with it. As I say, do the if you want to group it like that, do the grouping tutorial that you can find in my Blender tutorials with Nick, aptly named, the playlist on my YouTube. And again, if you want more, please like and subscribe. Be sweet. All right, wicked. I've been Nick, you've been you. I'll see you in the next one. Farewell.